Welcome to Fundamentals for Startups, a CoMotion Labs production. My name is Caroline Hansen. I'm manager of Startup Hall, where you are right now, CoMotion Labs Technology Plus Incubator. We are a multi-industry incubator hosting early-stage startups from both inside and outside the University of Washington. We provide our members with critical infrastructure and opportunities for learning, mentoring, and networking. And we're always looking to connect with founders in life science, hardware, and tech plus. For a limited time, tech entrepreneurs can take Startup Hall for a test drive and see if our resources, advisors, and community are a good fit. Use this QR code to apply now. Fundamentals for Startups is a weekly lecture series on topics related to entrepreneurship. Every week, we bring in a new expert to share insights and answer questions. All of these talks are streamed and saved on our YouTube channel, and you can learn about upcoming events on our website. Just a reminder, please wait for the microphone to be delivered to you before asking a question so our online audience can hear you. Today, I'm pleased to introduce David McFeeters-Krone, President and Commercialization Consultant at Intellectual Assets, to talk about the market for R&D partnerships. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. I live in Portland, Oregon, so it was a quick trip up by train to join you today. But we have an exciting topic that I suspect that many of you are not particularly familiar about, and that is how to tap into the federal largesse that exists within the research and technology sphere within the federal government. So I like to describe it as your secret product development partner. I'll go into a great deal of detail about where these assets are and also how best to get access to them. And I also want to mention that I serve a number of hats, but here I'm mostly wearing a hat that's related to the NIST's Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is a program that's devoted to helping U.S. small manufacturers solve a variety of problems, primarily focused on lean. My project is nationwide, and we focus on helping companies with production issues solve those issues through the strategic connections with any form of partnership, but we do focus on federally developed research and technology. So thank you very much. So the hurdles that I'm trying to help you guys address are these that are listed on the screen. But basically, as you're working through what is undoubtedly a new process, you're going to run into issues that you haven't seen before, just by the very nature of the work that you're doing. So as a result, instead of trying to bully your way through it, there's a whole other network of individuals that are there designed in some sense to be able to assist you with those activities. In addition, by working with organizations that are larger than yourself, you automatically will gain some credibility. The way I like to think about it, and this has been proven out, is as you're trying to get funding or generate partnerships, sell product, etc., they're going to see a number of different things. Okay, yeah, here's my hockey stick revenue plan. Oh yeah, here's my great people that have PhDs in the disciplines that are important. But oh wait, they have a relationship with the federal government. I've never seen that before. What is that like? It just gets that moment of pause. It gives you a chance to stand out. And that's in addition to all the great answers you may get in helping you move your products forward. I also believe that these resources are generally highly leveraged. They're not always free, but I believe that the benefits you get from working within these spheres is significantly higher than just having a transactional relationship with, say, a testing facility. Now, in certain situations, you can't go to a federal laboratory to do simple tests because they are not designed to compete with private industry in that regard. But that's kind of a movable feast. So it always pays to ask the question, in projects I'm doing right now, where we were looking for wind tunnels, one set of people from within the Army were like, no, we can't do that. But in other groups in the federal government, we've been having some success. Just as a note, I'm pretty sure most of you have gone through the business model canvas process, and these are the areas that by working with these sort of partners that you can address. And it's nearly a third of it. So again, we're talking about key partnerships, key relationships, and access to unique resources that your competitors do not have. Generally speaking, these are underutilized resources, and your competitors are twofold. First, you have your competitors in your distinct market where you're trying to compete, but also you're competing for becoming the vendor of choice, the investment of choice, the employer of choice. These will help you stand out in all of those realms and help you become more successful. So again, we're talking about federal lab partnering. I'm David McFeeters-Krone. My small consulting firm is called Intellectual Assets. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. My contact information is there. As Carolyn mentioned, this is being recorded, so if you don't have time to catch this, please don't take pictures of the screen. Though I do have one QR code for an event that's coming to Seattle in the near future, so I hope you'll be there. Special thanks to John and Felix for helping set this up, and again, Caroline and Hannah and Claire for inviting me to speak today. So here's a little bit of numbers on what the opportunity entails. There are over 300 labs, closer to 350 facilities across the United States that focus on a variety of different tasks. They're mission critical on helping their particular department solve whatever mission that is. But along the way, since they've been spending trillions of dollars over the last decades, they have access to unique capabilities, they've developed unique technologies, there's amazing personnel and expertise that you can tap into. They have a secondary mission to be able to assist small manufacturers, primarily US, but not exclusively, on their road to being successful. It's generally in the realm of economic development, but they also see that as helping their own mission, because you're not going to be going to the USDA to talk about launching things into space. But if you want to launch things into space and you go to NASA, NASA needs assistance in a variety of ways. So if you have some aspect of what they're doing, you're then able to move them forward on their path. They sometimes will count the work that you do and they'll ask about it. And how much time did you spend on a project? They count that as ROI for their own programs. So you're actually doing them a favor by working with them. I'll also state that by talking with outside individuals, it helps keep their research fresh, relevant, and responsive to what the economies are doing. There are a large amount of resources available in this. It goes from the thousands of hundreds of technologies per year. There are up to 2,000 patents that are issued within the system per year, which puts them in the top 20 of, and often in the top 10 of patenting organizations, if you were to compare them. That's a pretty big list. Below them are a lot of companies you've heard of. And now, patents are just one way to look at their success. There are all these facilities and there are all these individuals. However, as you may have heard in the news, the number of individuals that are working within these laboratories is dramatically dropping over these coming weeks. So let me just take one moment to talk about what's happening. Right now, the way that the Office of Personnel Management and the groups that are slashing personnel aggressively are not paying attention to what the work is being done. They're not being called by needs of how well they're doing their job. Anyone who was hired in the last year or so is on this list to be immediately fired. I've had projects affected by this right now. And here's the new thing that I heard about. You've had a successful postdoctorate experience, you've gotten hired by the lab of your choice, you are flying high, you've done really well. Last year you got promoted. You're back on probation. Those individuals who are being fired because it's easy from a legal perspective are actually some of the top producers in these laboratories. So what can you do to help as part of this resistance? If you are in a position to hire people that may have been let go, please let me know, and I'll be happy to try and find individuals that might be able to help you out, even if it's just a couple of months, because they've been terminated. They might get hired back, but they might not. Anyway, so it's a very sad state of affairs. That being said, the work continues, and I think there's still an opportunity to work with the federal labs, particularly because what they're being told is that they're not useful. So coming in with your problems to help them solve those problems is a form of resistance, and I would encourage you to do it now more than ever. It is a challenge because some of the administrative staff have been fired as well, so it is hard to work through the system. But there are assist organizations like myself that are working under grants, so it doesn't cost any money to do that, to help manage that process. And we think we can help make those things happen. All right, editorial off. So now, there are, as I said, hundreds of laboratories across the United States. You may notice a pattern here. Most of them are on the left coast. So that makes our job doubly hard. It's important that we know that this is what we're up against. The closest ones in the area are Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which is down in Richland, not easy to get to. Bremerton does some work. There are USDA labs spread out across the area. There's a particularly nifty nettle facility down in Albany, Oregon. And then you get to even more farther reaching things like the Idaho National Laboratory, which does very sophisticated energy work. And then you're kind of adrift until you get down to California. It's very possible to do these things remotely. I've rarely traveled to set up these arrangements, so it is possible, but it does take a little extra work. So you need to get comfortable with the idea that you'll be talking to people elsewhere. I think COVID has kind of helped that to some degree. There's another group, There's another group called Manufacturing USA. As part of my work with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, we talk about this group as well. So this is a group of now 18 institutes spread out across the United States, again, mostly left coast, that are focused on pre-competitive research and in a variety of different disciplines. I'm not going to name all 18 of them, but some of the major ones are 3D printing, lightweighting, advanced fabrics. There's 2 or 3 that are working in the biospace, flexible circuit boards, power electronics, robotics, and the last one I'll mention is going to be there's an AI facility that's being stood up as well, but it isn't quite ready for partnership. These groups do have funding that's available, but the major asset they have also is their members. So our group has been pretty instrumental in helping small manufacturers, small companies connect up with these groups to be able to find answers to resourcing issues, sourcing particular materials, or just generally getting business development experience. All of these things are possible. But it's a resource that, frankly, is not particularly well tapped, particularly by small businesses. They are trying really hard to make that happen, but it's hard for them because they are primarily focused on working with large institutions. I mentioned before, I'll call it the geographic imperative. This is just a small chart showing like how many projects are done within a certain geographic region of a particular lab. And as you can see, the farther away you get, the less likely it is that you'll have a relationship. Again, totally doable, but they're working with what's easy for them, so you have to make yourself easy for them so that you can come in and make these projects work. There are many, many different types of agreements you can work with federal facilities. We're going to talk about the 2 at the top of this, but mostly about the Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, or CRADA, C-R-A-D-A. And this is an agreement that allows you access to federal facilities, and it's a great opportunity for you to work with them. The next one down that you probably heard more about is licenses. Licenses with the federal government work more or less in the same way as they do with licensing from universities. I do think that there are some wrinkles in that, some advantages of working with the federal laboratories. They do not have the same profit objectives as even the universities have. They treat patent expenses in some situations very politely for startups. Sometimes they actually don't charge them at all, feeling that since civil servants did the work that was already paid for, it was in last year's budget, so they don't go after it. That's fantastic. That's not across the board. There are certain facilities that are easier to work with than others. Generally speaking, the Department of Defense, the USDA, and NASA tend to be some of the easier groups to work with. The other ones are sometimes run by contractors, and they have sort of a mixed set of objectives, and so that makes things a little bit more complicated. Some of the more higher energy facilities also are just difficult because they're doing super secret work. There are, of course, Department of Defense laboratories that are doing things that are highly explosive and highly secret. Those are probably not the things you're going to be working on, so it probably doesn't affect you, but it's good to know. These other agreements are other ways of working with laboratories. If you have any questions about them, I will be happy to be mingling during lunch and answer any of those questions as they come up. I should have also said at the beginning, if anybody does have a question about something going on, I'd be happy to address them as we go on. I can't tell if there's one in the back. But if there is a question, I think get the attention of the person with the microphone so that we can move on. Right. Oh, we have a question. Excellent.
I was curious, how often have you found a model kind of like the Washington Clean Energy test beds?
I think you'd have to define that for me before I could answer.
Like state-funded, basically equipment available for whoever wants to use it.
I'm not sure how that ends up working, but what I'll say is the federal labs have many sets of equipment. As I mentioned, wind tunnels. I'll be listing these off later, but wind tunnels and insect libraries, all sorts of sensors, different types of materials, material testing laboratories. So I would say yes, it's available, but I don't know what the terms are for using the test bed. Generally speaking, the closer you get to someone, like just sort of ordering someone to do a test, like could you go and punch this thing and see how hard it takes, you're going to be paying money for that. It's often going to be run by a contractor, and so that in most situations, if the federal labs are paying a contractor to do something, there'll be some full cost accounting. It gets a little more wiggly if the material you're providing helps them with a service or a mission objective, and the person doing the test is a civil servant. So if you were to try and graph that, that would be becoming less and less expensive over time. But depending on what the facility is, and depending on what the material is, and depending on how much that person gets paid, it would be difficult to say, except to say, you should try. There's no reason not to. I mean, there's hundreds of places. I mean, the government does everything. I mean, they test food, they grow food, they have HVAC people that need to do logistics, they move things, they build things to some degree. I mean, that's the other thing that's nice about working with the federal government is they are not your competition. So as you work with them, the issues regarding confidentiality are, I would say, better because the workers, all the civil servants, are covered under the Espionage Act. And so whereas an NDA is basically just a piece of paper that someone can choose to break, it doesn't have the same teeth as going to jail. And generally speaking, civil servants are very happy doing their job, and they're not willing to put their career at risk in order to share your secret to someone. I'm sure that sort of stuff happens somewhere, but generally speaking, it just doesn't. It's just a very different relationship, and the nature of the agreement, it's a cooperative research and development agreement. They're eager to work with you. Did I answer your question?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Was there another hand? Right. Moving on. So again, the CRADA. The key things you can use a CRADA for are getting access to technology to do testing, getting access to the facilities at a laboratory, including the people. You can do your own product evaluation, or if you're looking at something that they've been doing and you're thinking about licensing it, you can use a CRADA to do some of that preliminary testing to determine if it actually works in your scenario. You also can use it to do material transfer. So say, for example, you have a new material, like we were just describing, say it's a new ballistic plate, and you would like to see how that works within their test regime. You don't even necessarily have to be there for the test because it may be a secret test, but they will then test it for you. The flip side is also true. Like if you have a material that they have a material that they've developed and you think it might be useful in whatever discipline you're in, you can then take it out of the laboratory, do your testing, and bring it back. That's the key thing. A little comment about how CRADAs have been valued over the years. There was a research study that was done by a partnership intermediary group called TechLink, and they looked at a whole series of CRADAs that were done at one particular laboratory. So it was over 600 different CRADAs over about a decade, and they asked some pretty simple questions about like, okay, how much was, as a result of doing this CRADA work, very specific, how can you describe the extra revenue that you brought in over the course? So the top line number was enormous because there were companies like Lockheed and Boeing that were involved, and so the amount of revenue we're getting was just off the charts. But I was able to do a little bit of crosstab work and take a look at what was it for small companies, that were trying to come in there. And the net of all of that work was, in general, doing a CRADA with the federal government netted about an average of about $3 million of revenue from doing the work. So I don't have an ROI, so I don't know how much they spent on doing the work, but in general, commercial revenue grew on these companies. They could attribute it to the work they did at the Federal Laboratory by $3 million. I think that number is actually low because it doesn't include government sales that they made, which were at least as high, and it also is depressed because many of those CRADAs were done with the complete knowledge that the investigation was not going to end up creating a significant amount of revenue. I don't know what those tests were, but you can imagine that there were just things going on with organizations that it was clear that it was just not going to end up moving the needle. So I think that's pretty amazing. I actually don't know why this isn't touted more within the Federal Laboratory Consortium press and why TechLink doesn't blow that number out, because that's who you guys are. This is the type of value that you can more or less expect. And it's not too surprising. I mean, like, if you're on the cusp of something, but you're just waiting for just the right test or some extra smart people to get you over the cusp, that's all you need. But getting access to that generally is pretty challenging. So there's a number. So if you need to convince your board or your lawyers or other people in your company or any of your partners that this is a good move, here's a number. And I'm happy to provide the full report. I think it's referenced. No, I took the reference off. But it's readily available, and if you need it, I'd be happy to provide it to you. So what sort of technologies actually come out of the federal labs? So this is just a couple, and then that are sort of well-known. I'll also go into some specific examples that I worked on. So there's a lot of work done on shaped memory alloys. I believe those came about for deploying satellites in space and getting all the solar panels to go out. So once you kick them off in the lower temperature, they then expand into their memory position. So this was done with NASA, the NSF. The first sort of like terrestrial use of this was for these expanding stents that were used for cardiac patients. And then also tremendous use in shaped memory alloys for braces. I mean, if you've ever talked to an orthodontist now, it almost, I don't think they actually would return the money, but it's so easy now compared to what it was like before with having to tighten things in ways that were inhuman, and I'm speaking from personal experience. It was just a mess. And then I forgot what the last example is. So there was a lot of the work that was done for Apple Siri was done within the federal laboratories and then licensed out in some way, or was just co-developed. And so as a result, there's just been a number of things you've heard about but are not well advertised that have their start within the federal laboratories. I mentioned this National Energy Technology Laboratory down in Albany, Oregon. They were the originators of how to create powdered titanium. That's really important because that's using powdered titanium in the pressed metals industry is what allowed a lot of aerospace products to be created. Now, of course, we're moving towards 3D printing, but the alternative for creating titanium parts before near net shape was very, very challenging. And so this group grew out an entire industry. And it's just a sleepy little lab sitting in the middle of Oregon that no one knows anything about. And that's repeated over and over and over again through the federal laboratories. So these are some examples of things that I've done. And I'm going to bet that none of these overlap with anything you're specifically doing, but it's just use it as an example to see the incredible breadth of work that's going on. And this is just me, one consultant who spent a decade or two looking at laboratories and trying to find these relationships. So the first one was a technology that was developed by NASA. One of the researchers discovered that if you were to wear flicker glasses, so they were using LCD shutters, it would weirdly reduce motion sickness, which is a big deal when you send someone into space, because the first day or so, people are just sick as dogs, and they can't get stuff done. And of course, back in the day when people weren't up in space for months, that's a big deal. If you're up for 2 weeks and you've lost a day and a half, that's a lot of money. So this was a technology that was developed at NASA, licensed by a company that made 3D glasses for the movie industry. And it was then tested at a Circus Nauseus at Aberdeen Proving Ground, which was a Department of Defense facility, because the DoD recognized that individuals popping out of the back of Stryker vehicles, a third of the time were functionally disabled, to the point of as if they'd had several drinks, like they were that disabled. And that's not the time when you want to be fighting your body. You want to be fighting your adversary. Again, armored, not surprisingly, there's a lot of work that goes on in protecting soldiers. There's another company who makes transformer coils, so for all these wrappings, but they wanted to do it with 3D printing, but most 3D printing materials, in fact nearly all, are thermoplastics, which is completely unsuitable for transformer coils because they get hot and they would melt and they deform. So this company is working with Oak Ridge National Laboratory to try and use their specific UL-listed material that they're using in molds to be able to be 3D printed. So that's an ongoing project. And then another ongoing project is a company in Iowa that makes wax that's used to make candles. And they make it out of soy, so it's a total bioproduct. But soy does not behave in the same way that paraffin does, and so they're trying to find a way to make that more suitable. And so they're working with the USDA with their biochemists to find answers so their production levels are better. So, here's, again, just basically a farmer in Iowa who's been working a long time at making a great product, wants to make it better. Their R&D is, bucket chemistry. Now they're working with people with PhDs who can really help them. And they are super excited, except for the individual who was fired. That guy's not less excited. I'm running a little bit short, so I'm just going to move on a little bit. I mentioned some facilities. Again, huge range. So not unexpectedly, there are these wind tunnels. There's a lot of work for doing material processing. I mentioned the insect library. I had a project with a company that wanted to test the ability of a particular sensor to see when mosquitoes were coming in order to keep soldiers from getting leishmaniasis, which is a parasitic disease. So Walter Reed Army Medical Center has a whole range of vectors. So if any of you are doing work with insects, they went there and they were able to take advantage of that work, which otherwise would have been probably pretty expensive. I don't know what UW has, but it's a pretty extensive list of horrible creatures. I think we've talked about this already. Why does Federal Labs do this? It helps. The main reason is it fulfills their mission and also of helping industry, but also helps them get their work done. What's in it for you? Number one, getting an answer to some sort of vexing problem. I mean, I can't guess what it is that you are staring at. But there are a wide range of things that are being addressed. And that includes the needs that the federal government has in cyber and AI, in addition to many of the hard tech things that I mentioned today. Those are, I think, a little bit harder to find the right entry vehicle, but I can feel palatably the issues that are coming up within, particularly the Department of Defense, on how to deal with not just defense, main defense primes, but like carrying that ability to hold second, third tier manufacturers not accountable, but just giving them some provenance on making sure that the work that they're doing is actually up to snuff. And it's really hard. So if you have any answers to make that easier, there's lots of resources. Also, there are resources here in Seattle that you may know about through the Mission Acceleration Center or TechBridge, et cetera. All right, this is my cost slide. This is not based on data, but just sort of like qualitative information. The closer you are to the company's mission, or sorry, to the government's mission, the less expensive it generally will be. The farther away you get from it, the more expensive, and at some point, they just aren't going to do it because it's not in their mission. So you're not helping them. So you can't really get it at any cost. Working with the federal government is its own sort of taste. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. I have been doing it for years. I think that working with the federal government is easier a lot of times than trying to do business-to-business connections. The profit motive, as I mentioned, is not there. However, they do operate at their own pace. There are agreements that have taken months when it really felt like it should have been done in weeks. I have successfully closed one of those CRADAs in 10 days. That was the exception. Generally speaking, we're talking like 3 to 4 months. I believe there's a question. I'm happy to pause.
What about FAR and DFAR clauses? Because that's most hard to deal with the government.
I didn't catch that. Can you say that again?
FAR clauses, FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, and.
Oh, FAR?
Oh.
Well, you're not acquiring anything, so the FAR does not apply for these sorts of agreements. There's another 3 hours we could talk about the various ways that the FAR is involved and what there are ways around the FAR. I will just take one moment to make another slight tangent. If any of you are SBIR recipients, the magic of phase 3, which you can technically skip to after phase 1, but anytime you have an SBIR, you are then eligible as a sole source justification. So what does that mean? If you have a product the federal government wants and you meet spec, they do not need to go to RFP. So your question prompted that answer. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more. We aren't talking about SBIRs and that sort of non-dilutive funding, but I know a little bit about that. I'm happy to chat about that afterwards. Is that enough of an answer for now? Excellent. The next major thing that comes up is there are IP rights in working collaboratively with the government. In my opinion, like all of these things, they're just business decisions. So you need to look at what's on the piece of paper and decide if it's worth it. The government IP rights generally say, and there are some specifics there that are important, they generally say the government has, in many situations, the ability to make it for government use at some point through a third party, if they so chose. My view on that is if that's truly the case, that probably means you have something that's really valuable. And I'm hoping that you have a non-government use for it as well, because the government is a great customer until it's not. But I think that's it's worth discussing with your team. I think it's a risk worth taking. In most cases, it really kind of depends. The key thing is the government does not own any of your background IP or any work that you do after you stop working with them. So that means if you come in with great background blocking IP and then you develop something in this narrow window, they really can't do anything with it because you're blocking them. And similarly, if they get you over a certain hurdle, but it's not sufficient to commercialize, even if it's patentable, if you then evolve it further to a preferred embodiment that's cheaper, faster, better, blacker, whatever it is, they're not able to take advantage of that either. So I believe it's limited. A lot of lawyers freak out over that. So if you're a lawyer and you're freaked out over that, come talk to me. I'll talk you off the ledge. I think the other advantages here generally outweigh it. But if you don't believe me, then just don't do it. Just like anything else. I mentioned confidentiality. I actually don't think that's a concern. But again, if you are in something that's highly specific and you're worried, then you just need to have those conversations. And again, if you don't feel like you can trust the government, means many people don't do it. Go find someone else to work with. We're going to move on. Okay, so here are some great ways to get access to various labs. One is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and that first domain is mine. So that's my personal page with the suffix CATS, and that's the program that I support, which is the Center for Advanced Technology Solutions, funded through NIST MEP. My time is free to you. Once we go to anyone else to help you, then of course it's a different question. And we do more help than just helping people connect with the Federal Laboratory System. We also will connect you to appropriate vendors. If you have an interesting solution that you'd like us to blow out in some way, if it's sufficiently ready, we will do what we can to move it out to the 51 field centers that support the MEP. If it's not ready, I personally would love to hear about it, but we probably won't be able to support it out because those individuals are all about getting things deployed right away. I also want to give a shout out to Impact Washington, which is the manufacturing extension partnership that is in Washington and serves you, so that's their domain. There's also the Federal Laboratory Consortium, which I mentioned a couple of times, and they are focused on this conference that's coming up. This tiny URL that's here also will take you to a link. Let's see if I click this. Yeah, oops. So that QR code will take you to a special registration page for the upcoming Federal Laboratory Conference, which is in the second week of May here in Seattle, where you'll get a chance to actually meet some of these laboratory managers and some of the scientists and see more of the technologies that are available. It's a $25 entrance fee, mostly to make sure that you show up. It's just an hour plus a reception. It's something that I am personally organizing, so please come. It will be mind-blowing. So if any of this has teased you in any way at all, know there's much, much more beneath the covers that you can take a look at. And then lastly on this list is the Apex Accelerators. If you're not familiar with them, that's your first stop shop if you're ever going to do anything in government procurement. They will help you get set up with on the SAM system. I can't remember what the S stands for. It's not speedy or simple, I know that. And also, if you need any certs for woman-owned small businesses or anything else that makes sense in this new age, they can help you with that as well. And they will help identify other procurement opportunities within the FAR that you might be able to apply for in some way. I would encourage you to go talk to them. I would also note that different consultants within that group have different skill sets. So if you're not getting what you need, maybe talk to another person there. All right, pause here. Are there any questions? I'm going to go into process. All right, so generally speaking, if you are thinking about doing a CRADA, you've got some sort of problem. So what do you need to do? Make a crisp one-paragraph description of what it is you're trying to solve. And then from that, you will then shop that through various labs. And that's something that the either Apex or more likely my group will be able to help you do. Find the right laboratory that might be able to help you. Again, that time is free. The lab itself has their own agreements that you have to sign up with. The person you'll speak with at the lab is either going to be the researcher, or it's going to be someone from their ORDA office, which stands for the Office of Research and Technology Assessment. The person in charge of the office is often called the ORDA, and they're the ones that will sort of make the determination. They're like the tech transfer manager or the senior person in the office that does CRADAs, which are like sponsor research agreements or licenses, et cetera. From there, there's going to be a three-way discussion with the researcher to make sure there's an appropriate scope of work, and then you go into the signature process. As I said, the signature process sometimes can take 6 months. I've had them take a little bit longer. I've had them take less. Generally, the key thing in working with them is just constant vigilance. You just need to make sure that folders don't literally slip between the cracks. And I've had that actually happen, where I called a friend of mine. I was like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know where the folder is. Folder had physically slipped between the cracks. So being in a polite squeaky wheel is always a good thing. I will note that generally speaking, it's difficult to get a call out of a federal facility. They're very willing to talk to you, but if you're expecting a call back, it just doesn't happen in the way that you would think it would. Leaving a message, I'm not sure why the construct I've decided is that if the researcher, I'm sorry, if the manager has a choice of people to call, but they're trying to be fair, then they're either going through some sort of list, which you may be at the bottom of, and so as a result, they don't return your phone call. However, if the phone rings, then that's not up to them. So they haven't made a choice. They're just answering the phone. So I will call several times a day sometimes if I'm really urgent to get something, and I'm just like I know my caller ID is coming through. If you're feeling like you want to be a little more clandestine, and this sometimes creates a pickup also, is a star 67 blocks your caller ID. So consider that. We've talked about some of the drivers not being necessarily money. There are two different types of facilities. There are government-operated, government-owned, and there are, government-owned, government-operated, government-owned, contractor-operated. Contractor-operated facilities have a different feel to them. In some ways, they're more attuned to what business needs, but in some ways, they're much more difficult to work with. So, it's kind of a catch-22. If you work through a group that's familiar with the process, they can help guide you or at least get you prepared for what's going to happen. I was mentioning speed before, and this is one of those issues. Generally speaking, if it's urgent, like needs to be done tomorrow sort of behavior, probably not the right place for you. You kind of want to think, out ahead. Kind of like applying for a grant. It's like, okay, the grant process is going to take 6-9 months, and you're thinking, well, I need money today. The key thing is like, okay, 6 or 9 months from now, you'll be happy you did it. So it's never too early to start those relationships. The sooner you have the relationships, the faster all these other things can happen, because otherwise you have to have that first meeting. If you've already had the first meeting, and now you know you have a need a month later, you're already on your second meeting and you've spent no time. That's perfect. Understand that the labs themselves have certain limits. They'll pretty much tell you what they can and can't do. Many of those things are statutory. So I do have large companies that have complained about the terms that are in the creator agreement, and I'm like, these were determined by Congress. So if you would like to change it, please talk to your congressman and come back to me in a decade and maybe we'll talk. It's a very flexible agreement. There should be no reason for major changes. It's great. And it's also the same thing that you sign, she signs, Boeing signs. It's the same agreement. So you're level playing field. And it is true U.S. founders and U.S. companies do have an advantage. So if you have foreign nationals in your company, it will require a discussion. They will not be allowed on certain facilities. I was dealing with a company from Canada that was a subsidiary of a U.S. company, and I could not get them into a lab. It was mind-boggling for a technology that was 10 years old, patented, and totally disclosed. That's it. All right, that kind of snuck up on me. We have about 20 minutes or so for questions. I'm hoping there's some.
So if you have a particular type of so if you identify some sort of expertise you need, what's the best way to go find the person? I assume start Googling, but then call them up, the researcher, or is there a front door that you should really go through to get someone's attention?
So back on, I'll get to it. The federallabs.org site is probably a good starting place if you're trying to self-serve. There are some search capabilities on the site to help you find the right laboratory. Generally what I do is I will start with Google. I will look at patent resources. I've been doing this for a long time, so I generally will go to the usual suspects right off the bat. Your Apex accelerators could potentially help you with that as well. It kind of becomes sort of a little bit of a full court press. The method that the CATS teams uses is iterative. So we will go to the first likely suspect and start asking them questions on your behalf and see how close they are by bringing them back to you. And then from that, you will then develop a type that you're looking for, and then we'll use that to go to the next level. We're also, just as a general rule, our group is, we are technically oriented, but we're not technical specialists. That gives us freedom to ask a lot of dumb questions all the time because we generally do not know any of the answers. and we're not afraid. So, perhaps present company excluded, you come into a room, you're trying to impress people, you want them to think you know what you're talking about. We 100% not those people. So that gives us the freedom to try and find the right person by asking a bunch of seemingly naive questions. But yeah, the right place to start is looking at the Federal Lab site, looking at the patent database, and frankly calling me.
As someone in the software space, AI, mental health type of stuff, I'm curious. I know a lot of this is focused more on like facilities and like lab testing and stuff, but I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about what resources are available first in the software side.
Well, sure. So software, of course, has a purpose in some way. So where you're going to want to go is you're going to want to find the organization that cares about your end result. If you're having like issues with algorithms, I think that's a harder nut to crack exactly. I mean, they're not going to help you code, but they may have access to data sets to help you along the way. They will have input on, again, your target of opportunity, if that's something valid. I heard you say AI and mental health. So the VA has a lot of aging veterans, and I would strongly encourage that sort of behavior. The Army in general has issues with mental health of their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and guardians. I don't know what the Coast Guard calls their people. Guardians is the name for the Space Force people. So it's out there. It is a little bit harder. Hard tech is generally an easier place to look for something, but it's not impossible. We have taken on some of those projects, and they're not the most. They're the harder ones to do. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, again, and everything is very specific, and it may be that they can't answer all of your problems, but there may be just a piece of it that they might have just the right solution for, and be able to resolve that. And then you've got 12 things to do. One's done. Huzzah!
If you are in the early stages of your startup, trying to validate your solution, looking to identify who might be interested, what resources can you turn to even begin that search, to find people who you may want to interview, to establish if there's a need, and go through that sort of exploration?
These groups are not particularly well suited for doing like your I-Core style of customer interview behavior. But at the same time, all of that's based on relationships. So if you have a solution that you think is going to be valuable in a discipline that is important to a particular agency and a particular researcher, talk is cheap. Make the call. See what happens. I would be happy to field those calls and see who I know and just put you into the world that makes sense. I mean, researchers are busy, so if it's something that is not going to help them specifically at this particular moment, it'd be harder to get their call back. But if it's a thing that they see on their radar as being important in the future, then you might. So again, that sort of depends. The MEP system is not as well suited for sort of helping you do that level of marketing at that early stage. But again, I would give Impact Washington the opportunity to meet you, have you understand what you're doing, and there may be something later on they can help you with, and they may know just a couple people that would be useful. The other group, at least that I've talked about, is the Manufacturing USA Institutes. So again, depending on what it is that you're doing, in what discipline, in what area, and it might cross over, right? I mean, just because there's a robotics institute, I mean, those people are, they may need flexible circuits. So who knows? It would be worth having that conversation as well. Some of those institutes have very, very for the robotics institute, it's free if you have no revenue. So if you have anything that's in automation or robotics, and you want to talk to, either anyone along that chain, perfect place to start. But can you tell me what your industry is? What is it you're doing?
Nothing in particular.
Okay, so particulars matter in this case. So I can't answer that any more specifically then.
I have a question here. Have you ever seen any of your clients get access to labs through letters of commitment through like SBIR phase 1 or phase 2?
I think the answer is yes, but can you be, would they use the SBIR funds, you mean, in order to take advantage of the resources?
Correct, or yeah, if you've seen someone use a national lab as a letter of commitment for a SBIR award. Or is it only CRADAs?
I think getting letters of commitment sometimes from laboratories can be a challenge. It will depend on the lab, the researcher, the relationship, et cetera. In many cases, you can use funds from an SBIR to take advantage of these capabilities. But that also has gone both ways. There was a time where, a little bit of inside baseball, but there was a time where one of the agencies did not want you to take SBIR funds as sort of like an end run to fund the laboratory. And so you would need to provide a very specific justification why that facility was very important. Generally speaking, it's not that hard because it's a unique facility, a unique individual to be able to help you. At one point, NIST, when you got an SBIR, it was, no, I'm sorry, with NIST, at one point when you got I think a license, it came with a CRADA attached. I'm sorry, it came with a license attached, so a 2-for-1. And so that greatly sped up a lot of the administrative burden. I think in the current environment, again, assuming SBIR persists, those sorts of agreements are going to be looked at very favorably.
I was struck by part of your aside early on in the talk, just about the number of people who are leaving these federal facilities now, and obviously there's a tremendous amount of talent that is extremely sad and a loss for the nation, but at the same time an opportunity for some of the small startups here. So other than just sort of word of mouth and trying to figure out what's going on, is there any sort of resource, site, place to go to more efficiently tap into all? How do we know who these people are, and how can we take advantage of it?
I'm expecting that those things, if they haven't started to be developed, will be. Because those people's managers are as bereft as the entire lab. I mean, it's really, it's a sad state of affairs. They are traumatized. I mean, it was a really disturbing conversation. So no, there is no national resource, but there are individuals who are really trying to help. I do not have access to it. Most of the time, hiring people tends to be, a contact sport where it's, somebody who knows someone. I would just say, now is the time. And I would say, particularly if you need someone short term, because these individuals do not believe they're going to get rehired. And I have no way of knowing that. But I think you're better off making a proposal like, hey, we need someone for a couple of months. Would you want to move to Peoria and or Seattle? Sounds great. And work with me on this project, or maybe they can do it remotely. I think there's a great opportunity. But again, remember they're research scientists. They had a plan, right? And their plan has been upturned. So they're not gonna. I don't think they're ready to give up on that plan yet. And then logistically, in case you're just trying, if you're following the news, I mean, it's just going to be like fired, lawsuit, appeal, appeal, appeal. That's going to take a long time. So during that appeal process is when you'll have the chance to, psychologically really help someone, make them feel good, and also help yourself. I think there's great possibilities. And I'm a little bit torn because I want them to actually stay within the federal labs and do the work. I mean, that's their purpose. But I certainly don't want people thrown to the wolves. That's just wrong.
this is kind of a quick follow-up of my earlier question. So I just did a quick search of like federal test beds. I'm curious, have you worked with those? Is the process of getting something started with the test beds easier than what you've described, trying to find people? And
I would say, not knowing exactly which ones that you found, I would say yes. If they're advertising that they want to do work, then yeah. And that would probably be more like not a CRADA, not a license, but one of those other agreements, which is a work for others is often the phrase. And it really just means you're contracting their facilities in a very specific way. Sometimes you have to be careful in that the work for others agreement is anticipating that there won't be any inventions. And so you don't get any of the IP protections that are within the CRADA process, which is generally bad for the small business, because the way those the IP protections work is if a civil servant is doing work under the scope, you have rights. But if you haven't signed that agreement and the civil servant discovers something, you don't. You still can license it, but you wouldn't have effectively non-exclusive rights to that going forward. The flip side is still true too. Like if you're under CRADA and you're doing work, or you think of something technically in your shower during the period of the CRADA that's within the scope, assuming that was figured out, technically you're supposed to report that as part of the CRADA work, and the government would get their rights. But so again, it depends. But in answer to your question, yes, it would be easier.
Hey, so you touched on it briefly, the sort of manufacturing USA. In my experience with like the national labs, they're more interested in the breakthrough technology. I'm just sort of wondering about like your experience in that sort of like next level of development and scale up and getting it to a point that it actually is commercializable. Is this resource still for people at that level, or is it really just the breakthrough sort of early stage?
Manufacturing USA is statutorily required to do TRL 4 through 7. So it generally won't be early stage things. I think they do tweak that a little bit. They'll go down a smidge. And of course, in the process of doing some of the work, you may make a new discovery, and that would be earlier. But generally speaking, they're doing that. Everyone describes the work they're doing as the Valley of Death, but it's like Valley of Death work between 4 and 7. In my opinion, Manufacturing USA's problem is getting from 7 to 9. They've been having trouble getting stuff out. It's a combination of, perhaps not working on the right things, not having the right people in place, and also working within a consortium. You have a lot of people who have collective rights, and so there's that. Hopefully, I can get it right. The fuel of interest to the fire of genius, the Abraham Lincoln quote. The fuel of interest becomes less, because if you can't own the area, you're not going to make as much of an investment. I do think that the consortiums that are Manufacturing USA are trying to address that. You can do it contractually. It's just it's harder, and they're working through that. They're all relatively new. There's only like, I think at most they're 7 or 8 years old. Some maybe 10. So they're still working through some of those growing pains. Definitely time for one more question. Don't be afraid. I won't bite. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you from lunch, but again, I want to thank my hosts very much. Thank you all for attending. This is a great turnout. I really want to encourage you to, if you have not taken a picture of that QR code, please do. Please attend. I will be there, as will probably there'll be 400 or so other people there, probably representing about 100 different laboratories, at least 10 different agencies. If the right person isn't there, we'll be able to get you in touch with them way faster. So if you're thinking about like, gosh, how could I get started? How can I get a better feel for this? I don't really understand what Dave's talking about. It's too nefarious. Not nefarious, I'm sorry, too nebulous. Definitely not nefarious, nebulous. It will really put a fine-tooth comb on it. There's an award ceremony that happens, and those posters are present. The posters, again, some of it's really deep tech. I mean, like super deep, like probably not useful, but it will give you an idea of like just the vast range of things that are possible and how smart some of these individuals are. So if you want to geek out, just come for that.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to David. Next Friday at noon, Venturous Managing Partner Jen Wren Henry will talk about understanding investors' questions. Sign up today, and we'll see you next week. And I think lunch is ready. Thank you. Join us outside.